Hello and welcome to the Horror Book Club podcast. I'm Joe. Here with me is my co-host Dan.
Hello and greetings.
Chapter 9 was interesting to say the least. Now, it continued a lot of the themes and ideas from the previous chapter, but except I think it's around this time that we have Renfield who's escaped. And what's interesting is that he does not escape until he knows someone's right in the doorway, almost. He wants someone to see him escape, almost. That's what it seems like. But at the same time, he genuinely wants to escape. To be near Dracula. And I can't help but be puzzled and amused by that. As well as find it very interesting. Maybe it's that he didn't trust and thought they were right outside the doorway or something and just waiting to pounce on him since the door is open. Mm-hmm. And it's when he saw that they were there, it's almost an animalistic reaction.
Yeah,
so maybe, that I thought was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also, Lucy has commented, I think, during this chapter, on the red eyes of a certain somebody in an almost dreamy state.
Yeah.
Now, Mina apparently basically shudders when she remembers it, which shows two very different reactions to an extent. But at the same time, Lucy ends up terribly disturbed by it herself. So we'll analyze that in a moment. We also learn in Chapter 9 that Mrs. Westenra, Lucy's mom, is dying. And we've got Mina, who's been reunited with Jonathan, and I was very amused by it. Sister Agatha, his nurse, who basically crossed herself at the mentions of what he had gone through. Natural human reaction. And we get Chapter 9 where Lucy's state is deteriorating, and we're finally introduced to Professor Van Helsing. And Helsing's one of my favorite characters.
Oh, yeah.
And something we discussed earlier was that in the 70s, there were some quote-unquote sequel. In this book, it's generally Mina and Jonathan who are taught the ways of the Force, so to speak. And I like that he tries to approach it with a scientific mindset. It can't be a vampire until I've proven it's not everything else. And I really like that you see the scientist in him before he turns to the occult. And as much as, he's trying to figure out whether or not it's an actual disease or it's a vampire. Mm-hmm. And he doesn't just jump to the vampire conclusion like most portrayals have him do. He goes, no, it's got to be, is it anemic? Is she anemic? No, she's not, Professor. Well, I want to check for myself. Okay. So she's not anemic. Okay, so what's the scientific reason or source for this? And that's interesting because he's very scientific-minded and methodical.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
It's like the entire topic of possession. A lot of, it's like people say, the church uses possession as a propagandic tool. Apparently,
I'm actually going to make a different kind of comparison. This is rape.
Yes, absolutely. No two ways about it.
This is the literary equivalent or a subtle way of saying rape. And I got the feeling when reading the Lucy part where it's like, well, she's dreaming about it. But some rape victims go on to live with their abuser and try to make excuses. But at the same time, Lucy shudders and is disgusted by her own thought. Or so it seems. And Mina's just like, I want nothing to do with that. And the reaction of the two girls is very different. Lucy responds by breaking, and you have everyone who pities her and pities her and pities her. Mina reacts with rage and anger and then breaks down crying. But she's very angry at quite a few points with Dracula for doing this to her and hates him for it. Both reactions are very understandable. But the way Dracula behaves, it's all about his own gratification. Mm-hmm. It's not, the girls are not gratified. And on a spiritual level, it is rape. And even physical to an extent. So maybe the battle between Jonathan and Dracula is one to an extent of, for the spiritual purity of Mina to an extent, improving, it doesn't, on one level, it doesn't matter if she was raped, Jonathan still loves her for her. And he's a Chad for that.
Yeah, he's...
On the other hand, this is a knight seeking to purify his maiden of a curse. And Mina wants to be purified of the evil of Dracula, who in turn, tries to, purify herself. And, Mina, I mean. And Dracula, for his own part, keeps trying to force his rape on more and more gals. And the way, this book is dealing with that kind of topic. And, maybe you ought to rethink what you think.
It's like perhaps that's the symbolism of Renfield.
He's also a rape victim in a way.
And he's, in a way, pardon the term, fetishizing his relationship with Dracula.
Yeah, but you see later that he's terrified of Dracula, and reason he follows him is he's afraid of him. And he's scared of Dracula, but he wants him. In a way, like he's drawn to him and admires him, but he's afraid of him, and later comes to hate him. Mm-hmm. And he actually breaks down at one point over Mina because he's like, that poor girl. Because he's like, I of all people know what she's enduring right now. So Renfield has very, very weird emotional reactions and is very manic about it. He's been violated by Dracula. And he's a very tragic character in the novel.
Mm-hmm. And yes, he comes across as out of touch with reality, manic, a little insane.
But given what he's endured, it's very natural. Now we get different reactions. We get Lucy, who's unsure and just generally a broken girl. Like emotionally, there's nothing left of her by the end. She's broken. Poor girl. You have Renfield, who's manic, and you have Mina, who's full of anger at what's been done to her, and is even more passionate about Jonathan and proving her loyalty and love for him. You have, you have these three different reactions, and you have even Jonathan who becomes initially, his reaction is one of mania, essentially his own violation. But what does he like? Later, he becomes an angry, brooding guy, almost like Sturm Bright. Fascinating is people might use the argument, well, what about Mina when she says, "Ha, me jealous over Jonathan? Ha." But then she goes, "Oh my gosh, thank heavens there's no other girl." But that's realistic. But the other thing with her is, what is she? Mina, you got to bear in mind that I think it's the letter to the Corinthians where love envies not. And that's the ideal with Mina. She's the ideal woman, according to Bram Stoker. So she's not going to be too jealous. And you got to bear in mind the passion that her and Jonathan have for each other. They trust each other. Mm-hmm. And they trust each other to such an extent they know one another will never go for another woman or man. And that's why Dracula violating her angers them, because they only want each other. And that's why they're like, "You're dead. Okay, you've done it now. You're dead. You're going down, Drac."
And what's fascinating about Mina is that in one of the letters or journals, she pretty much made a comment.
In the chapter, I think it was in chapter 9. Yes, it was. Let me just find the exact part where they're married. And let's see. And drew me to him with his poor weak hands. It was like a very solemn pledge between us. Now, I could tell him that, before that, when he kissed me and drew me to him. That's code for, I actually think that's the point, possibly one of the points in the book. I forget how, when it ends, what month it ends in. November, this is September. The book ends in November. Well, except for the epilogue. It's September. I think it's at this point when she gets knocked up with Jonathan's kid. Because in the epilogue, they have a lot of babies. And I think it's at this point that she's knocked up. And that it's at this point, like, you got to look at it as a loving relationship between them. And that Dracula is an interloper, in a way. Because Bram Stoker apparently regarded this book as a romance and adventure novel. to a large extent. And yes, he was writing horror consciously, but he was also writing a romantic story. They wanted to write about now both Jonathan and Mina have been violated. Both of them have at different points. They've both been drained, so to speak, of blood. Well, to an extent on Mina's end, and I think Jonathan was. But the two share a great deal of, like, they're both angered at this interloping into their life. Mm-hmm. And because basically the sexual deed is only for the two of them. And that's where... And kill him, yeah. Anyways, if you like this video, like, share, subscribe, leave a comment.